So he decides to donate dark to a Republican, like to Republicans. And part of the accusation is he knowingly did this through one of his, they're like, hey, don't work a 9-to-5 job, like be free like me. And I'm like, you're here on a Sunday at like 5 p.m. How free are you really? Like, you're just that token, then you sell it off, and then the price plummets. So you thought you had a bunch of money, but actually it's worth nothing. Like, there's all these new scams that have emerged as a result of people getting interested in this idea of an alternative, basically screaming about, all these scammers online. And unlike my previous work, which kind of had resonated, like it had gotten, or you were a grandma who just put one Bitcoin on there, or, more likely the grandson. He treated all the accounts the same. So when everyone came running for the money, they just withdrew until nothing was. Or with just put a bunch of garlic cloves in the pot. I still remember our house like reeked. She would put 60 cloves of garlic in a stew. If you're from this one, you're not okay. Or I might say, hey, like CZ has connections to China, like maybe that's a problem. Or CZ has connections to here, maybe that's a big deal. Executives Ryan Salami or something. I think that's his last name. Salami. I don't know. I just don't know how to pronounce it. But he was like, yeah, the number 3 donor to the Republican Party. But it was all orchestrated through Sam. Some reactions, but not much. What I noticed is it resonated with people beyond the views, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Like, I was just like, there was something different about the reaction to it. Like, and Vic
involved in what you do.
It's a weird thing.
So when did you start your YouTube channel?
So I started it a few years ago, 2018, 2019. They're setting it up with like, I used to be broke like you. Well, that's a strategy. A lot of these guys were never broke, right? It's just part of the story you have to tell to be really effective. It's like, make something work. If it's going to go to the public, you have to solve all these issues. And unfortunately, we saw crypto kind of go mainstream before they had. So by the third interview, I'd studied him and I said, okay, how do we get down to FTX's responsibility in this whole thing? And I kept coming back to it was the terms of, because every day it's getting less valuable. So the question is, what do you do if you're in that country making money? If you want, they wanted to store some Bitcoin with Tom Brady. They wanted to be alongside Tom Brady. So he's like, there was fungibility between wallets. Middleman, because there's no one who controls like Bitcoin, like no one can say like no to a transaction. Now it's like there's nothing to stop you from sending that money, and then you caught. In my view, what he did was criminal. That's why I started. But it hasn't been prosecuted or anything like that. But he's on a leaked private call. Everyone can go listen to it yourself. It's just this, appreciate your transparency, kind of kissing up a little bit. But I was just like, somebody has to ask him some real questions. So I had 2 prior little Twitter space interactions with him, and he kept getting away with the fact that ours, and I'd go because it was like my friends like said, hey, we have to get somebody, you want to go? And I was like, sure, I'll go. I was like kind of fascinated. And you'd see these guys, lied my way into it. I can sort of lie my way out of it. And this is what he did. So prior to this, I'd interviewed him twice before, and I had kind of gotten hamstrung with he's just so good at dodging stuff. I just wasn't interested. I was like, that's not my life. So I always wanted to sort of, have a voice. And so I started a YouTube channel just doing random videos to, like, if you're Alameda Research and you're funneling money through a personal investor, that I think is the problem. They're the son of Harvard lawyers. We just sort of can't lose. And nobody paid attention to some of the red flags that were going on until ultimately it was too late. It turns out he was. What I know is everyone's always interested in pulling up the ladder after them and like building the kind of the rule book around like, hey, like if you're from this certain jurisdiction that we're a part of, you're fine. If you're not, like
the fact that they were all living together and fucking each other in this giant penthouse. This $40 billion penthouse. The things, it's insane. It's really, I almost wish.
Money and go start trading with it, unless obviously we have FDIC insurance, stuff like that. But like they didn't have that. They just take your money, go trade with it, and that's where the disaster started. There's no Ethereum left. There's no Bitcoin left. You don't have the real tokens anymore. You just have your sort of nonsense FTT tokens, the tokens you invented. And he said, "Oh, So the person's not named in the report who was donating to Democrats. We know the one donating to Republicans was Ryan Salami. But that person eventually, her and I believe Gary Wang were big executives. They're cooperating. They pled guilty. They're cooperating with the feds. I mean, they did the systems would reach out to me. They'd be like, hey, I'd been scammed by this guy, and I didn't realize what was going on. And you showed me, sort of like how the whole scheme worked. I didn't really know what I was looking at the time. Then I go to college, and all my friends get an MLMs, multi-level marketing, sort of like just like hey, you're going to get rich. So I was always getting invited to these like get rich seminars. The problem is when at the exact moment FTX can't pay you back is the exact moment that FTT becomes worthless. So you think you have all this collateral money. Like, well, how can you view this as a battle? Like, but he viewed it as like we're sparring partners. Like, and you won this round or you won the war.
Because he thinks this is going to go on forever.
His whole thing was he did this thing with Ultimate Bet. So he was one of the lawyers. So there's this poker site called Ultimate Bet. And he got caught in this scandal where they had enabled this thing called deal, but I'm from the Bahamas and I'm American, so that might be fine. I mean, everyone's always interested in the regulations benefiting them. The challenge now, though, is, a lot of people there was a lot of fear of missing out or FOMO in the markets at the time. Everyone thought, oh, cryptos, you have to get in now, right? Because if you get in now,
views about what? Like you didn't start doing this. You started doing just like a normal interview show?
I was just doing a normal interview show with a few of my buddies, and these exchanges where it was worth more. So he was arbitraging this difference in prices. And then after he made his money that way, he launched a shocking thing. And I think that shows, like, if you're running a shady empire, like, who's better than a shady lawyer to try to help you cover it up, right?
How did you get in?
Right? The inflation rate, I think, is like 75% or something like that. It's an unimaginable, it's just out of control inflation. And if you hold on to your Turkish lira, you're in for a bad time. Not actually like this incredible business that you thought it was, that you're going to get rich easily. So don't do that. Go do crypto. You got to get into crypto now. And then it became I started hearing about these tokens. And they're like, hey, selling courses, like, it's always the new grift. You always have to find, because people figure it out. Like, they go like, oh, that actually doesn't work. Like, hey, drop shipping is money to a politician on my behalf. You're a straw donor. You're not really a donor. So Alameda was using customer funds to pay off politicians in order to try to get favorable. We're just going to do a few transactions through your name. That just came out in a press release. It's the new charges. He was basically like they call them straw donors, because it's like, if I give money to you to give back, everyone loses confidence. Everyone sells their FTT tokens. No one wants to buy it. It's worth nothing.
So how did this all fall apart?
Great question. So assets, you can check yourself. Like, I have $1 billion in USDC. Well, that's great. But it doesn't matter if I have $1 billion in crypto, Bitcoin, whatever, if I owe $2 billion.
Right.
It's kind of like, okay, it's a little bit chic to be donating to Democrats. You can do that without too much, negative press. But if I'm the number 3 donor to the Republican Party, that's going to be a bad look. Very treatable kind of cancer, and she's fine. But at the time, I watched her as she's like, gets this diagnosis, gets swept up with all these hucksters who are telling her that the way to treat thyroid cancer.
What was the first video?
I started as sort of like an interview show, nothing about scams. I had a channel before it. I
don't really understand what's going, like the FTX thing, for example, the best one, because I was so in the dark about this thing. I was like, what is happening? Like, what are they doing? Try to break it down for us. Like, first of all,
the account fiat at FTX. And so what prosecutors are now arguing is he knew, of course, what it was. He deliberately obscured teas for a while. But like, so I eventually like pivoted into this crypto direction and learned all about that. But it started just from a curiosity about scammers, and I wanted somebody to say annoying. So
that.
The famous example is like Coinbase is in America, and they have to file all these forms. They're a regulated entity. They're publicly traded crypto keys all the time. I mean, it's kind of an interesting idea where you go, I'm going to get in before everyone else. But why is so much of your balance sheet made up of your own tokens? It's a big question. So one of the things that FTX had done, and a lot of companies were doing at the time, now is they're finding a bunch of campaign finance violations because he was trying to influence politics, U.S. politics. I mean, it's insane how deep pilfering FTX, the customer deposits, and was using it in Alameda Research, which was his trading firm, to try to make extra money, and he lost it.
And so this is all because it's
right? It's all at some address. And so people were asking, like, you say you have all this Bitcoin, where's the Bitcoin? You say you have all this Ethereum, where's the Ethereum? When you withdraw, there's nothing tying your Ethereum to your particular address to like this random external address because you send it to a different one. Never understood how Bernie Madoff got people because it seems so preposterous. And then I fell for something very similar. And what I noticed with all of these things, the thread is success. 2 months, you're going to be making 5 figures a month. 10 months, maybe 6 figures a month. And I've done it for people before. That's the social proof. I've shown people how to do this. Don't invest. Like, that's a bad idea.
People were calling bullshit, though. Just like they were calling, there was a few people that were wary that were calling bullshit on Bernie Madoff, and there was a few people go back to making money again.
I don't think he thought he would repay everyone, but everyone thought like, oh, we'll just enter Chapter 11 bankruptcy, we'll restructure the company, we'll reopen, we'll just turn all the debt into new. At the end, when you're like ready for this thing to go down, because I know as soon as I get on, it's going to end pretty quickly after. I said, let me ask him some real hard questions. Because all these guys are like, Sam, and so now it's trying to be sorted out by the guy who literally unraveled Enron. And he says, this lawyer goes, it's worse than Enron. Around, right? Kevin O'Leary's in. So you kind of think you're swimming safely with like other savvy investors. And that's what ultimately gets you to buy in. Bernie Madoff is very similar. Where's the money? I don't know. But he controls everything. And so it's like this is the tactic of these offshore companies is like you put the
easier or more profitable for him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why would he do that?
I'm not as familiar with the regulation side of things. People were talking about that a lot. Coinbase or something like that.
Right.
So FTX launches. Let's start with who Sam Bankman-Fried is. He's kind of at the center of all of this. Sam Bankman-Fried is this guy who he's the son of 2 Harvard lawyers. He cleaned up on all his own customers. Just basically taking their money. Like, oh, I know exactly when to fold. I know exactly when to bet. So he had God mode enabled, and then they found out, put like let's say I have Ethereum, one Ether into this mixer, right? This pool of money. A bunch of people are putting 1 Ethereum into what that was to hide it from people who were trying to take a look at his books. But it's just, that's what I mean by black box. You never know what games these guys are playing. Like they say, oh, here's sort of like the rough estimate of our back. Sort of, this is a fraud because, no one knew. There's a bunch of backing. So I made a video at the time being like, this crypto CEO just describes a Ponzi scheme. But even Western Union has been they've been getting kind of pinched a little bit. Like, hey, you guys got to stop allowing all of this. But in crypto, because there's no your hands in both pockets. But publicly, he's just like, he's donating to Democrats because he says, oh, I'm like this, like, I care about all these issues.
Yeah.
But it's like even more cynical than just buying one party.
And probably overly confident.
Yeah, it's pretty clear he didn't see like the full scope of the situation, especially at first. It seemed like he thought, he was like saying FTX US is the experience of the lawyer that FTX then hires is like being complicit on a leaked private call, trying to cover up this God mode scam. Washington. And I think there was like a tweet from Sam saying like, oh, like I'll see you the next time you're in Washington or something like that. But like, it was kind of a dig because he knows CZ can't go to Washington. Like he would be LGBTQ plus causes. And it was through a guy, and the guy was like, I feel a little uncomfortable with this. And they said, well, we don't have anyone trustworthy at FTX we can donate through. There were some margin trading accounts. And I'm like, no, but there were people who didn't trade with margin. There were people who just put their money with you. And they wanted, I hate doctors so much. And it always seems to like end up with a sales pitch. Like it never was like, hey, let me just give you this free thing. It was like always like there's a catch. Mm-hmm. So I didn't God mode on Ultimate Bet where the CEO could see everybody's hands and play on the site, seeing everybody's hands. So he just said, well, hey, can we restructure all this money that went through me like a loan so that we can, say that I took a loan out and I was donating so we didn't violate any laws. They never ended up doing that. Was going to undo sort of everything. Like if you don't root out the scams, you don't find ways to solve that, this is never going to work, because if you're will fall for something doesn't mean you're safe. Like you have to do, I hate to say do your own research because that's such an overused like scammy phrase. It's actually such like a phrase like that, it's almost used as FTX in 2019. And that's a crypto platform where honestly you can make a lot more money than just with a trading firm. So FTX quickly skyrockets in popularity. The right people in charge who are going to take the fall, you resign, and then you blame it on them later when everything goes wrong. His problem, though, is Caroline Ellison flipped on him.
So she definitely flipped on him.
She was smart. Yeah. She cooperated. What are you saying in the terms of service that means that I can't sue you? You have all these terms of service that basically say none of what I'm saying is true. Like they say they can get you rich in the sales pitch, and then I'm this guy who's going to maximize good in the world. And that was his reason for working all the time. I mean, that's the justification to be hopped up on amphetamines. It's like maximize productivity, maximize human happiness, money system. Especially in our modern age, I mean, it seems like you can understand where they're coming from, the average person. All these other guys buy into him.
Right.
And then they themselves are kind of also looking at each other, being like, well, that guy did it. Like, what? It's the hottest deal. Gay, so like, can you do this?
So someone had to be gay to do it? Like,
no. Basically, they were like, we need someone trustworthy we can trust to do this. So hey, you're going to be the guy. Like, we really perpetuated their fraud. I can break it down. How much do you know about the FTX?
Let's
situation?
break it down for people that don't know about it. So
let's do it. So FTX was this crypto exchange, everything. I don't have access to the book. Like, I basically knew nothing. So anytime you'd call him out on an issue, you'd say, where's the money? He goes, well, I don't know. It's gone. It's Alameda Research. Ask Alameda. Regulation for, I guess, offshore crypto exchanges, right?
And so these campaign finance, these violations.
So I decided to start pursuing it step by step. And at first it was like just me discovering like, well, what is this? Well, how does this scheme work? Okay, so I buy this course and then what?
One guy who lost a hard drive and who's paying people to go through a landfill to try to find his hard drive because there's billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin on that hard drive.
Yeah, people lose their... And that video has aged so well because it's like people are like, oh, it was all true. But people were outright calling it a fraud. Like Mark Cohodes, he's a famous short seller. Somebody found out about this God mode. And so the lawyer's like, how do we basically cover this up? Dan Friedberg's like, how do we, what do you want me to do? And he's like, hey, it means playing League of Legends while on investor calls. Like at the time, that was seen as this charming, genius thing.
On calls.
You could hear even actually. Okay, this is what was going on in crypto. They're called collateralized loans. But what FTX was doing was they were saying, hey, like, we'll take $1 million from you, but instead of giving you Calori broke that showed that maybe they're not as healthy as they should be, there would have been a run on the banks and people would have found out. It's just like, when are they going to find out? He happened to be the final straw, if that makes sense.
So someone would have...
I used to play like a variant of League, so I know it's fun, but it's not like fun to the point. Look, this guy's whole thing was like, I'm this effective altruist. Ethereum, what are we tracking here? And then it goes to some mixer somewhere, and then we don't know where it goes after that.
So when Sam Bankman-Fried was working with Reg
Z on Twitter, I probably butchered his name, but he was actually originally sort of an ally of Sam. So he invested in FTX early on, put $100 million in, and they bring on people like Tom Brady to promote it, Larry David in the Super Bowl. They kind of get buy-in from all these big sort of names and also reputable. That's what ultimately matters is how much do you have on deposits that you owe out. And so with Binance, we don't really know. The only one we have a little bit more of a look into might be one of the first like trillionaires or whatever. Like he's such a great entrepreneur. They think he's such a genius. It might have been one of the A1Z guys. So this is funny. They found his League of Legends account, and during some of the calls after it was a fraud, you could hear him clicking in the background. Click, 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 click. He's playing League, and from the arms of one huckster to another. Like it's just like it's almost to something worse. Is buying both, lying about it so that you can get all the good press of like caring about all these social issues while also not caring at all, and basically like, you know, shell games where you're hiding the money.
Yeah.
You're saying, oh, invest in this. This is going to become valuable later, but you actually own a bunch.
Gotten away with it?
So many of these scams are like these issues of either regulators not having time, not having the resources, and she would drink it up because she thought that would make her better. Ultimately, my dad convinced her, like, you got to get the surgery. Like, this ain't going to fly. You have to, you know, ultimately get the surgery. Dark, where it's like you can donate through super PACs, political action committees, and you can donate as much as you want, and you don't have to be, your name has to appear nowhere. And so that's actually not having sort of like, it's maybe not big enough. You know, they're good people, a lot of the people going after these guys, but it's like trying to catch everyone who's speeding. Sam goes, oh, you won like our battle. And people were like, you know, is it a battle when you lose billions of dollars of customers? Or, you know, something like Europe or something like that is you are subject to all these regulations which require you to be a little more careful.
Oh, those are pesky.
Yeah, you put $100,000 into this little mixer, and then it sends $100,000 out later, and nobody knows where that money came from.
What is a mixer? How does it work?
It's interesting. So the most famous example is Tornado Cash. Literally had a $10 billion account that he mislabeled with Alameda Research.
Mislabeled?
Yeah, CX said in their terms of service. So one of the really big problems was they actually weren't doing that, but nobody knew because nobody had to look at their books. Like, it was very opaque.
Analogy for losing your house?
You know what's funny? Yeah.
You know, I mean, good Lord.
The idea of these mixers was you'd anonymize your transactions. So, like, let's say in the terms of service, they said results may vary. What's that about? I mean, ultimately, it's like, and so I realized, like, oh, there's this sophisticated way that they're preying on my psychology. And
how does a guy like that not wind up getting indicted?
I ask myself that every day. There's so many.
Is it a matter of time, or is it he's people that were standing out and saying none of this makes sense?
Right.
And who were those people?
So there were a few people. There was
figured it out, and someone would have started dumping their coin.
Yeah, people already. I mean, even leading up, like CZ gets a lot of the credit for it, but like already, like a day before, do these trades that are profitable in crypto. So the way he first made his money was he did something where he bought Bitcoin in the U.S. and then he sold it on these Japanese. He thinks he can reestablish control because he's so smart. He is such a good liar that he's like, I can just lie my way out of it. So I think that's why he ultimately talked. His idea was, if I can take that money and you can send it to what's called a mixer, which is this like fancy language for a way to like anonymize your transaction. Like you can't do that and then say, oops, I played a little too much of my video games and lost billions of dollars. Like, this doesn't fly.
Well, he wasn't saying that I played the video games. Yeah, that's why I lost the money.
But myself, they kind of shut down. Myself and some other people were saying, like, we think they're insolvent because we had taken a look at their numbers and we said, there's no way they have the money for this. They don't have the tokens. It's this guy who drives a Toyota. So you go like, well, why does he need to scam me if he's driving a Toyota, right? Then it's like, which Sam Bankman-Fried did. Then it's like, okay, really, everyone got to look at it all at once in one place. And people notice, like, wait a second. A lot of their assets are just their own tokens. Like, they had a Serum token, which they control most of, after ads, like get-rich-quick schemes. Like, you've got a bunch of people, you know, flexing in their Lamborghinis, telling you, you know, they're like 25 years old, telling you, you want to get rich by 25 or 22. I'll show you. I made $1 million. It
was like 70,000 or something like
60 plus, yeah.
So that's the lure. The lure is you buy in for pennies, and one day you're insanely rich. I'm sure you know about that.
You can watch them. These are real people, Joe. You can be just like them. And so I started watching this, and I started like seeing it. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so interesting. I mean, he was, you know, really well regarded in Wall Street. So when people invested with him, they knew the like returns were insane. but change that money for some type of crypto token. There's a lot of different tokens out there. And
explain tokens, because I don't understand tokens. I know there's crypto and there's tokens. Like, what is the difference between the two?
It's sort of like hard. You kind of have to disprove every single, like there's always a new like health guy telling you that there's some new alternative discovery, whatever. And I was like, this is kind of weird. And I was like, why do they that these basically nerds in cryptography thought of, which is it's brilliant. I mean, it is brilliant because it is basically it's almost impossible to trace. Tom Brady backs him. Well, Tom Brady's got to have some guys who are looking into this. And then it's like, well, BlackRock backed him. Well, BlackRock definitely has some guys who looked into it.
Right.
It's Sequoia Capital. They said he was, and then you'll launch your own token that people can invest in, sort of like they're investing almost in your crypto exchange. And so that was actually one of the ways that FTX
and sell off all his tokens. Would they be still solvent today or still in operation today? Would they not crash, or was this
It's a strange time, man, to be covering crypto, because I tried to tell people for years that this scam problem, this fraud problem. I have 2 employees, and both of them are overseas. Like one of them's in London, one of them's in Ukraine. And so for me, I have to pay them, and I have to do the You do not get to that level and not know that things were wrong.
Well, reading her tweets about amphetamine use was pretty wild too. The whole scene was wild.
I'm blanking on the name right now. But
A1Z? What is that?
No. I'm sorry. I'm blanking on. It's this famous. I'm going to remember it right after I get out of here. It's one of the famous. I used to be just like you, Joe, but then I found out that doing Amazon drop shipping is the way to make millions of dollars. And I used to fail, but by these little tricks. They have to say what they have, where they're putting their money. They're subject to more regulation about like how they take care of customer deposits. One of the big things with FTX was they told people, hey, you put your money with us. We're not going to touch it. We're not going to move it. That's what but FTX was sort of the worst offender is let's say I give you a loan, Joe. So an unsecured loan would be I give you $1 million and I don't ask for anything.
Down. Because it seems like they received additional scrutiny, right? Because now people are starting to look at it, and I saw that their value went down considerably. Yeah. So when I see something like that go down, I'm like, how did he get Steven Spielberg? How does someone like a Bernie Madoff or Sam Bankman-Fried, how does he get these people to do this?
You're like, it's this magic internet money.
Magic.
How do you get some of that? How do you get some of that magic internet money? Well, you have to go somewhere to buy it. And so it's a crypto exchange is where you kind of go, you put your fiat, that bill, and now that it was all a fraud, or the guy who basically pushed it was a fraud, now they're like trying to retool it of you're just having to trust these shady offshore entities that they're telling the truth. Binance says they're fine. They show proof of reserves, but what are their liabilities? Actually, his whole technique of shifting the blame like onto Alameda and like, I don't control Alameda. I've seen something very similar. I'm investigating this Ponzi scheme that's offshore. Your issue is that anytime there's demand for withdrawals, you're going to encounter problems. So it was going to be inevitable anytime any store.
Bizarre that so many people got duped. And I felt the same way about Bernie Madoff. I'm not a financially aware person. I'm not into the market. I don't follow these things.
Hey, just make this problem go away. This is the CEO. Like, go blame it on somebody else. Go blame it on some third party that got access to our website. Say it was like a glitch or something. And so that TT. So it looks like if you just look at their assets, it looks like they're covering their liabilities. They owe customers $10 billion. Looks like they have $10 billion, but eventually got paid out like $2 billion.
Whoa.
Yeah. Some of it was in this FTT token though. So they have a bunch of FTT, right? And so it's like November was when all these guys basically, a lot of these people backed Sam with the highest endorsements. And so if you're just an average person, you're thinking, well, how much more due diligence can I do than all these other guys?
Through crypto.
Ransomware. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. 100%. Because before it was like, okay, you need to use like Western Union or sort of one of these these places where you can kind of send money without too much scrutiny. Most of this 10 billion is just their own tokens. So CZ takes this opportunity to kind of spread some, sort of information about that. He says, hey, we're actually $10 million or your data's lost forever. And you're like, call the police, and you go, hey, track this guy. And they're like, to what? To a Bitcoin wallet? To really taking that. I mean, maybe some of them were taking it seriously, but not enough.
So if FTX didn't encourage regulation and CZ didn't get upset at that, regulated, like if he was doing this, like Coinbase can't do this. Is that correct?
Yeah, Coinbase is much more heavily scrutinized. They actually have to file with the SEC. It's really interesting because it was like a battle between FTX and one of their competitors, Binance. So the owner of Binance is, I think it's Changpeng Zhao. He goes by C. I, too, am safe because Tom Brady's got his money there. So I can put my money
So
there.
is the lure is like how Bitcoin used to be worth very little, and then one time it was with the high of Bitcoin.
Actually, campaign finance laws I've heard are pretty weak. I forget the name of the law, but it was passed in like the early 2000s, 2010s maybe, where it actually became